And I believe I am live. Hello, everyone. I have spent a lot of time trying to get this live stream format set up properly, getting it in such a way that it looks pretty good, making some minor adjustments. I'm sure that will kick in slowly over time as I figure all this out. Hopefully, all of the audio is set at a good level. Already seeing 14 people already within 2 minutes of starting this stream. That's fantastic. It's really amazing. So let's see. Everyone's just kind of talking right now, which is great. Greetings from Finland, from the Simple Gamer. Hello. I want to visit your country one day. Let's see. Greeting from the Netherlands. I was just there. So, I've got a lot that I kind of want to do in today's stream. It's going to just be a lot of hanging out. Unfortunately, it is just me. I don't have anyone here to kind of bounce conversations off of, so I will be interacting with the chat a lot more than I normally would. And I'm doing it here in my armory by popular request because a lot of people wanted me to do it here, I guess, so we could talk about specific items behind me. And certainly, it's going to be hard for me to try to keep up with chat. I did manage to actually get my streaming software to actually display chat here in the stream. One of the big drawbacks of the way the YouTube streaming works is that, unlike Twitch, the chat for the stream isn't really saved, from what I can tell. So when you're watching this video on my channel proper after the stream has occurred, none of this shows up. So I'm putting the stream right in the video so people can see it rather quickly. Let's see. So I wanted to go over some channel news, but before I do that, I want to make a quick couple of notes. Kind of the standard thing anybody on YouTube says these days. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I don't even know how you're on this live stream. But please subscribe. I have a link for Patreon, which I guess is this way on your screen. A link for Patreon. Any little bit is obviously helpful for the channel. My general statement for Patreon and really any support of my channel is please never do it if you can't afford it. I had a conversation with someone who was apologizing to me that they weren't able to support my channel anymore, and I thought that was just I thought that was just kind of a bad thing. You shouldn't try to support someone like myself or anyone online if you're unable to financially. Speaking of which, if you want, there is in YouTube streaming something called Super Chat. It's a paid chat, essentially. It does two things. One, it kind of sticks in the primary chat a little bit longer, so I have a chance to see it, and it gets subsectioned later, so I have the ability to respond to very specific questions. The chat goes by so quickly, guys. It's really very hard for me to actually just immediately respond. So I have to do my best, and if I miss something, I'm sorry. But a super chat is a good way to ensure that I will actually see your chat, your maybe question or request. And then I can respond to that. My goal is anytime there's a super chat, I will respond to it. I will make sure that I am on top of those things. So it's a good way of taking care of that kind of like trying to get my attention. And of course, it is a paid thing. Again, please never use it if you can't afford it. But it's a good way to support myself and any other streamer who does anything like this. It's always a little bit helpful. But again, not a requirement. We're up to 23 people already. That's crazy. Let's see. The chat doesn't go very fast if there isn't many people watching. That's true. Do I have a PS4? Yes, I do. I bought a PlayStation 4 for a single video game that hasn't come out yet. But I did go ahead and pick up the Uncharted series as well because, why not? And I'll probably go ahead and get some of the God of War stuff. And then in general, the game that I really wanted to play on PlayStation 4 is the new Spider-Man game coming from Insomniac. So I'm a big video gamer, and I don't really talk about that a lot on my channel. And I also don't do a lot of streaming of video games, although I have done a bit, right, on this. But for the most part, I enjoy video games, and I really enjoy a lot of things outside of just the Middle Ages, medieval things, even though that's what my channel focuses on. So let's see, have I played Mordhau? Not yet. I've not played Mordhau yet. Yeah. You know, I'm again, people talking about some super chat stuff. I'm not that worried about it. It's just a nice thing. I will call it out because it is a thing. And one person said, so York said, I really look forward to Kingdom Come Deliverance. Yes, me too. I am looking forward to Kingdom Come Deliverance. I will be playing it. So I kickstarted it. I actually did the Mega Edition because I wanted the sword that came with it. I wanted to support them as best as possible. And we will see how good it is. You know, I'm really, I have access to some of the preliminary stuff. I've done a kind of a minor video on it once. But I'm actually going to avoid playing it until it gets to the full proper release. There's a few reasons around that, but one of which is honestly, I don't have a lot of time to kind of constantly revisit a game each time it gets an update. So I've got other games I want to play as well, and they take up some of my time. So have I played Exanima? No, I have not. All right, so channel news. And then we'll talk about video games and movies and books, whatever you guys want to, in a bit. But some channel news. And I'll do some actual proper videos on this on the channel in the future. The 24th, I have been invited to join the Battle of Nations. It's the national finals. So they asked me if I'd be willing to come and just see what was up. I'm not heavily involved in anything like Battle of Nations, but I have actually been able to meet with some of those guys recently, and they run the Dragon Con Armory track, or at least part of it. And so I've been able to bump elbows with them. Really nice people, and they invited me to come out. Partially, I think it's just so I can be there and see what's going on and kind of do my own thing. They also asked if I'd be willing to assist with doing some of their live streaming. That's likely behind the scenes, just kind of help make sure that the footage they get is actually pretty interesting. So that's the thing I'm going to be doing February 24th, and I'll be traveling to South Carolina for that. And I don't know what videos will come of it. I really don't know what to expect. I'm going to kind of play it by ear. I've been doing so much travel and whatnot recently, it's kind of hard to feel like I've got my schedule and everything aligned in a way that makes sense. That's coming up. I've had some interesting things that have happened behind the scenes that I can't really talk about yet, and I might talk about in the future, maybe in a post-mortem if it never actually comes to anything. And then just in general, my channel has been pretty quiet over the past couple of months. That really is because of the amount of travel I've been doing. I've gone back and forth to Europe 4 times since late October, essentially. And those were sometimes for just a week and sometimes for multiple weeks. And that kind of travel back and forth, honestly, when I get home, when I'm actually back stateside, I'm a little bit too tired to want to actually do videos. And so I've managed to do a few here and there. And I'm certainly preparing for things for this year. And then also it's been extremely cold. It's actually been unusually cold for my region. And so I've avoided doing a lot of like sword reviews and whatnot because I want to be able to do, the kind of cut test type moment with it. And I've decided I don't want to do that when it's cold outside. It's actually not a lot of fun. So I'm going to avoid doing cut tests and whatnot until it gets a little bit warmer. I'm going to go ahead and move this up to a full screen thing without the chat for a moment, just so you guys can see me while I'm doing this channel update. And yeah, so I'm going to be doing some of those. I've got that Regent sword that I need to take care of. It's actually my priority, so it'll be the first one I do. I have a Falx that I want to do a review of. I have a dagger I need to do a review of. And these are all things I actually need to do reviews of because they were sent to me, either as a gift, not by the maker, but by a viewer, or they are loaned to me for the purposes of doing reviews. So I'm going to kind of prioritize those. It's always good to do that so I can get it back to the people. And yeah, so there's a lot that's going to happen with this channel, I hope. I'm also going to try to focus a lot more on kind of the documentary type thing. I think I've been struggling a lot with the way I do reviews. They're enjoyable to do at the time, but they're not really enjoyable to think about. I've done so many of them that I'm always afraid that I get a little bit repetitious and that I'm always kind of saying some of the same things. It's especially true if you're having like Albion or something. It's like, what are you going to say about their build quality? You're going to say the same thing you always say about their build quality. So certainly, I think that I need to figure out how I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to do more non-sword reviews, but certainly more documentary stuff. Someone in the chat just asked whether it be historical documentaries or industry related. Uh, yes. I've had some behind the scenes conversations on some other things where I hope to do some really interesting, what's the way to say it, combinations of the two. I don't want to say a lot because some of the things I've been having conversations with aren't really my idea, but I'm going to hopefully be involved, which is awesome. I'm really enjoying that. And the other thing I'd just say about my channel in general before we just kind of get to just doing live stream stuff is I'm right at that 25,000 mark, which is really fantastic. It's really crazy. Sometimes it's frustrating to not think, why am I not at 1 million subscribers? But at the same time, man, 25,000 people who subscribe to my channel and are willing to at least consider watching a video. My average video view on like a monthly basis is usually breaks 3,000 to 5,000, and that's for kind of my primary videos. My kind of secondary style videos get a lot less views. It's still pretty awesome though, and so I'm really excited to kind of hit that 25,000 mark, and then my next goal there will be 100,000, I suppose. The real problem with subscriber base and trying to make all that work really well is you kind of have to have daily videos, or at least really close to daily videos, to get rankings in YouTube, really push things up. And I'm certainly not at that level. I don't just produce a ton of videos. My videos tend to be more scripted or more well thought out, a lot more time in editing. And anyone who's watched, in the past 6 months certainly has probably seen that periodically I've done videos, once a week, or sorry, once a day videos for a week, and I don't think the quality's up there. I don't know that I actually really appreciate that, but I do have some videos I'll be trying to push out there that aren't just strictly reviews, and aren't just documentaries, that are just kind of those more standing from the camera talking things. I've actually got 3, I think, filmed and edited right now, and actually uploaded but not published. I'll be publishing them this coming week because I'm traveling again, and so I'll kind of use it to fill the gap a bit. And I hope to have some other things to come after that. But yeah, it's fun. It's interesting. I'm really looking forward to kind of getting this channel moving a bit more again. The travel has just really killed my ability to do videos, both in just pure time as well as just motivation, because I get home, I'm tired, I want to sit down and do something mindless like watch television. So all right, I'm gonna go back over to this view, and we're going to let's see, I think the next thing I had on my agenda was actually just to talk a bit about some of the travel and some of the museums that I have visited. So I'm going to read some on the chat here as well as I go. Bennett Snipe says that they really appreciate that I plan the videos, make higher quality than push videos for monetary sake. Yeah, so in all honesty, guys, I don't need YouTube to survive. I have a good job. YouTube is something that I only really ever do as a passion. It's a passion project, not a requirement for me. So I do take my time. I do wish I could do it more. And I do, and not just more in terms of just more videos, but more in terms of good quality videos on a regular basis. But realistically, it just doesn't work. Working a 9 to 5, sometimes more than 9 to 5, doing travel, all that stuff really eats into my ability to do this. And so I kind of recognize, YouTube is not going to be my primary thing. And I guess if I were to ever, I don't know, heaven forbid, lose my job or something, then I could do a ton of videos, but it'd be it would actually be a really bad thing, right? So part of what has actually made my channel successful is my ability to buy a lot of swords, and that doesn't come from the YouTube channel. So, all right, I want to talk a bit about travel, and then we'll actually dive into museums. Um, and uh, I'll just kind of go over where I've been over the past couple months. So I went into Brussels, and from Brussels went to the middle of nowhere to what's relatively a small town city called Mons. I was really there just for work, so I just kind of spent a little bit of time there. I didn't get to do a lot, but it was a nice little town, very French speaking, and I don't speak any French. So I don't really have a lot to say about that area, and I was in Brussels for only a very brief moment. Shortly after that, I ended up in Ireland, and I got to do a little vacation in Ireland, so it's the second time I've done a vacation there. And spent pretty much the entire time in Dublin doing all the things I didn't get to do the first time. And that included a lot of museums and a lot of just walking around. I'm going to give a shout out to my favorite restaurant that I found. It's actually a pub, but it's called the Hairy Lemon. And they have the world's best bread pudding. It's delicious. It was like the single greatest thing ever. So if you're ever in Dublin, go find the Hairy Lemon. The place is wonderful. And I got to do a lot of museums there. I went back to the National Museum, and I did take some pictures there. I'm going to note something about museums here. It's going to be a little bit of a tirade. One of the things that really frustrates me about museums is photo policies. And I understand them, and I understand the need for them. And I feel like as long as a museum is very upfront and clear about what you can do, everything's gold and everything's good. But sometimes they aren't. And the National Museum in Dublin has a real problem with making it very clear when and when you cannot take photographs. Their primary signage actually took a picture of their main sign that said, throughout the museum, you can do all this stuff. Flash photography is not permitted, and using a video camera with a tripod or a camera with a tripod is not permitted, but all other forms of photography and video is allowed. Cool. Primary signage says that, so I'm going to go do that. Then when I actually went in there, they had signs here and there that said no photos, which I assume was just a modification, so I didn't take photos in those areas. There were some places where it said, where it had a no flash photography sign right next to a no photo sign, so I didn't know which one to actually follow. I'm always going to default out of respect for the most stringent. And then I also was taking video of a couple of artifacts and was asked to stop, not because I was taking images, but because I was using a video camera. And apparently there was some concern with like child protection, something or other. I don't really know. I'm going to respect the wish of the museum, but it's really nice. I'm going to compare that to the museum I went to in Amsterdam, which is the Rijksmuseum. They're very upfront on their website and signage. Take photos. Done. Just have fun, enjoy it. Which is actually a really good thing, especially for a place like the Rijksmuseum where they have a lot of art. Because usually you're not allowed to take pictures of art. Art museums are very finicky about that kind of thing. So my one request to museums, like there's actually any museums watching my live stream, would be please be very clear on when you can and cannot take photos. So I want to actually talk a bit about some of the stuff I've seen at some of these museums. I'm going to probably start with the Dublin Museum, the National Museum in Ireland. So I did take photos. If by any chance, because their signage was terrible, I took photos that I should not have, I apologize up front. I try to do my best to follow the rules. As I move over to this page, someone is asking, can I get more info on polearms from my perspective? Sure. What do you want to know? I mean, I like polearms, and polearms historically were the primary weapon of many people on the battlefield. They were less of a judicial weapon, generally speaking, but there were a time and place for it. So, all right. So I took a lot of pictures at the National Museum in Ireland, and you can see the date here on my album is December 10th, 2017. It's actually not entirely accurate. It's made up of two different time periods. December is one of them, and then oh dear, it would have been I guess, late February and April of 2016. So some of these photos are a little bit older. And the National Museum in Ireland is one of my all-time favorite museums. Because it's a very artifact-driven museum, and it covers a large range of time periods. And they have just some beautiful artifacts and some really fantastic things that, especially for someone like me who really enjoys the weaponry side of history, has some really cool stuff for all that. So, this picture is of some of their Bronze Age weapons. These are items that were made out of bronze casting and properly molded and then refined down. And this is the central one is what they call a Bronze Age rapier. I mean, it's hard to talk about the size of these things. They're actually not all that large. Bronze Age rapier is a very thin blade. I'm trying to think of something that's around me. I mean, it's really not. The blade probably isn't actually even as long as, say, like a standard medieval arming sword. And it's fantastically, in my opinion, fragile when you think about bronze. It's not like the strongest material. So to have that very thin blade, it's a very, very thrust oriented. Probably wouldn't be very good at cutting. But these are also, to some extent, very much a status symbol. To have a sword during the Bronze Age would be to have something that was very difficult to make. I actually watched a documentary recently. I think it was Nova, where they had someone making a Bronze Age sword in very, very authentic manners. To some extent, they were using a lot of very traditional means for it. And they actually did their mold not out of stone. What you'll find in some of these pictures later is that there are stone molds for these things. They did it out of a different material, basically like a mud packing material. But they did a really good job. It was really an amazing process. So, and then the other swords are exactly what you think, Bronze Age swords. I talked a bit about when I talked about the Arslan Tepe, and I know how to pronounce that now, by the way. It's Arslan Tepe. I talked about those swords. They're only about this long-ish, and those are pretty large swords. Most of the ones you're seeing in this display case are about that length as well. I don't have exact lengths. I don't remember, but I don't think the placards had exact lengths either. We could try zooming in and seeing. And these are older pictures. You can tell the resolution isn't very good. No, it only has dates on it. So, unfortunately, I don't have a way of getting you the exact lengths on it. One of the crazy things about Ireland in general is you almost feel like you stumble over Bronze Age weapons there. I mean, you will go to a place that isn't even a museum, and they will have a display case with a Bronze Age weapon in it. They're all over the place. Really, really crazy. This is an example of a mold. This is actually for an axe. And so this is one half of a mold that would have been used to make a bronze weapon. And you can see back here is actually where the materials would have been poured in, and it would have created the edge. And then this is an example of an axe that would have come from it. So a Bronze Age style axe would have come from such a mold. And there'd be some mold points, and these things would be affixed to a wooden haft. And I think, it's just fascinating to think back that long ago and just be in awe of what some people have learned to do. It's pretty cool stuff. Here's some more swords. Sorry that my thumb is in this picture. I think I actually snapped this picture right before someone asked me if I could stop taking pictures, and then I asked and they apologized because I think they were thinking they're in a different spot. Again, I try really hard to obey and follow the requests of the docents and the people who run the museums. Yeah, it makes it really confusing sometimes. Down here at the bottom, this is a stone mold. I don't think I have a better picture of it because I took video of some of this, and I definitely was asked not to do video of it. But it's a stone mold that makes this kind of sword right here. And again, it's not the largest sword. It's only about, yay long. But it's really fascinating to see the stone mold version, which is, it's really no different than how we do modern molding. We have a mold and it fits together. There's kind of a die mechanism for it. So it links together. It compresses. They, tighten it down so there's no or very little leakage of the materials, and then they pour in all the stuff. I have just seen, I'm going to give him a call out, Matthew Jensen joining on. Hello, Matt. How's it going, sir? Matt is, in my opinion, one of the great YouTubers on the small channel side who needs more attention. He did a great interview recently with, I believe it was Tinker Pierce, right? He did it Gus Trim, right? Yeah, good stuff, sir. And so here's the other side of the display case. You can actually see, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here a bit more on this mold. So there's actually the mold you can see, the two ends of the mold that would have been fitted together and then, compressed and then molten bronze poured into it. And again, like I said, it's like we're talking about a museum here, so they're going to have a lot of pieces. But look at all of these Bronze Age weapons, all these blades, right? That's insane. Beautiful stuff. The central ridge on these things is always, in my opinion, kind of an interesting feature of older weapons. I actually have a video that'll come out this week speaking of an older weapon, kind of an ancient weapon. In this case, it'd be Grecian, but again, you'll see it at Central Spine. It's amazing how you can have these things kind of made in regionally different areas, and then you still kind of see the same technologies come about. I talked a bit about that to some extent when I talked about oh wow, I just forgot the kopis, the Greek kopis, and then the not to be confused with the Egyptian khopesh, and the Iberian falcata, which are very similar weapons in design, but all historical evidence actually suggests that they didn't come from the same source, that they were independently created. And then some people, I mean, whether or not that's true, it's kind of hard to say, but then some people also point to the kukri as an example of a very similar type of blade to come out, again, very regionally different. So people have solved the problems in very much the same way in some of these things. You'll also notice there are some spears up here, Bronze Age spears. Yorick, I have no idea if you're saying your name right, said, when did they stop using molds in the making of swords? At the end of the Bronze Age. You're going to catch me on the exact date range there because I'm not really good at that stuff. But molds were used a lot, especially with the softer metals. Once they started getting to things like iron, it began to transfer over to the process of forging. And that's a really good question for a better historian than myself, right? Or a better history person. But the Bronze Age is when a lot of that molding was done, and I don't know that it was done much past that. All that said, I think molding as a practice has never really stopped, right? So it's possible that it was used even up in the Middle Ages for various things, but probably not weapons, right? Probably not that. Here are some other kind of older artifacts. I wish I could say a lot more about them. Again, look at all these swords over here. It's ridiculous how many swords there are. And like every display case in this museum seemed to have more of them. They also had some various horns that were actually horns made out of horn, and some other various baubles and shields. I don't have a lot I can say about this because I'm honestly not knowledgeable enough. And really me talking about some stuff is please go. If you're ever in Ireland, if you're ever in Dublin, heck, if you live in Ireland, Dublin, you haven't been there, go to the National Museum. It's absolutely amazing. And for that matter, also go to the National Gallery because they have a wonderful art museum there, which I'll talk about in a bit. Okay, so here is an interesting example of a Bronze Age weapon where the blade has been now affixed to a handle. And the handle in this case is not made out of biodegradable materials. Now, I'm not entirely certain. I think that this is, and I don't have the picture, or I don't have the image of the placard in this case, but I do think this is actually an original and not a recreation. Again, more swords. Okay, so when I was actually there recently, they had a small exhibition on some African weapons. And so here's an African sword. I don't have the placard in this in this album, but beautiful weapon. It's actually something pretty interesting that came from a lot of African weapons in terms of swords, and that is on a lot of European using those blades, and what you end up with is a very kind of European arming sword style blade affixed to a very different kind of hilt than you would expect to see. Really fascinating kind of thing to happen, and I just want to take some pictures of it because as much as I like the Middle Ages and European weaponry, I like to think I appreciate weapons from all over the world. Another picture of it, and this is a shield. It's made kind of out of like a wicker almost. Very interesting again. It's solving problems in different ways. I think it's really fascinating. And this is the back of that shield, so you can see how it was held. They don't have like a boss in this case, so it's a piece that I think that's actually like a kind of leather and wood combination of the two. So not much protection for the hand really. And again, these shields are only minor protection, but a little bit of protection is better than none, right? So the National Museum in Ireland is just huge, and they have so many things and so many artifacts. I didn't document them all, and I really wanted to get to some of their more medieval exhibits. So, like I said, the very long time span that they're really trying to cover. I mean, the oldest thing they're basically trying to cover would be 3000 BC or something like that, maybe even 4000. But they had a couple of exhibits that are in the Middle Ages, and they also had a Clontarf exhibit, which speaks to the Battle of Clontarf, which is, I just blinked on the date. It's like I think it's 1017 or 1071, but I feel like neither of those are correct, so someone can correct me. I'm not going to look it up right now. But in the Middle Ages section, they had a lot of nice little artifacts. So here are some mace heads, and again, I apologize for that these aren't necessarily the best photos, but they're really fascinating mace heads. What I find amazing is that we don't see a lot of replicas of these kind of maces. And these are copper alloy, so it's worth noting, because we were just talking about molding, when would molding have been used? Here's an example where molding was likely used, right? These were likely molded into these shapes. Because it's a copper alloy, I mean, that could be bronze, it could be something else, but it is a copper base, which makes it a little bit softer. And, oh, hey, so, Glorious Trebuchet, which has to be one of the greatest usernames ever. He must really enjoy Trebuchet memes. Sent a super chat, said, howdy, love your channel. Well, Glorious Trebuchet, I love your name, and I really appreciate your viewership, and I really appreciate your donation. Thank you, sir. So, yeah, the mace heads I thought were really, really interesting things. It's especially large museums. I wish you could spend more time. Sometimes I feel like you end up getting stuck in a situation where you feel rushed to get through the museum. I actually spent a lot of time kind of looking and admiring these mace heads. It was this one in particular I thought was really, really interesting because it's really very haphazard. And you can see some back spikes here that look like they're missing. You couldn't really see it in the display case, which is really unfortunate. And here you see it's 13th or 14th century, right? So again, just because the Bronze Age was long past didn't mean they weren't trying to use some of the same techniques to make weapons. All right. Here are some of the swords that were on display. This is actually a sax style weapon. And let's see if we can get some zooming in action. Here's as close as I can get to it. But look at the detailing on this edge here. One of the great things about Viking implementation is because the materials they used, some of them stay around a lot longer. They don't degrade. You'll see that in some examples I'll have. The blades are well degraded, and this is part of the see 1014. I knew I was off. I said 1017. I knew it wasn't right. 1014. I apologize. Look at this shape piece here. Let's let the resolution catch up a bit. But interesting little shape piece that is left over. And again, some of these swords have you know, interesting molds to them and do a lot of beautiful work here. And you can just see, you know, how these things were made. You know, this piece being separate from the tang being put through. I mean, we know this from how swords are made, but to see the originals and to think that these are items coming from, and at this point, over 1,000 years ago, it's just insane. All right, let's see here. All right, bill hooks and whatnot. So a lot of different artifacts. You know, a couple sword blades here. These are actually daggers. Apologize. Scale is kind of weird for me looking at this in this way, but the bill hook here. I love the design of this thing. You don't really see a lot of bill hooks like that. In all honesty, they are pretty pretty unique in this case. You know, I think the bill hook design kind of, especially where this little kind of neck is, began to kind of move more into the primary blade. But a really interesting pole arm here. I kind of like it. I'm part of me wants to go find a replica of it or have one made. And they always had some pictures of different pieces of art depicting some of the stuff they were showing as well. I didn't get a lot of pictures of those, but yeah. So there's kind of large. These are large daggers. They say dagger blades, but they were probably about this long. So short sword-ish to dagger in those cases. Let's see, they have lengths on them. No. And these are from the 15th, 16th century. Worth knowing that things that come from the 15th and 16th century that are this degraded, a lot of times are very late finds or things that didn't get kind of well preserved, generally speaking. Julius asked the question whether or not the chip on the sword, left side one, if it's a chip side on the sword on the left over here. No, what you're seeing here, if this is what you're talking about, it's just a hook holding the sword in place. Now, these do have chips in them. You can see there's some chipping here. The problem a lot of times, and there has to be some extreme study of blades like this coming from you know, the museum curators and the historians who look at these things. It's hard to know if this chip is just due to degradation or if it is due to some kind of damage that had done, or a combination of both. Micro fracture analysis, they can actually tell. You know, I'm looking at this. It's really hard. The color correction isn't quite there. Let's actually try to do something with this real quick. Can I adjust color and light on it? Light. All right, so let's see. Nope, not really. Oh well. This is one of those cases where I wish I had like Photoshop up or something. But I can't tell if it's just a bad grain, but there looks like there's a bit of a line that continues down into this blade, and that would almost suggest a fracture if that's actually what I'm seeing there. It's hard to tell if that's a fracture or pitting, right? But really, you know, really interesting that, you know, you can't always tell. Certainly big chunks like this are probably more degradation or damage that were done by some other means. You know, if these things sit underground, for example, who knows what happens if someone steps in just the wrong spot and breaks off the very fragile piece of, in this case, I guess it's kind of an iron steel. Look at this axe head. This is again an example of just the beauty and the amazing kind of preservation that happens when non-degradable materials such as silver are used. I believe this is probably a form of silver, but it is really, really fascinating. The clarification that Julius just asked whether or not it was a double edge or I only have one edge. Sorry, yeah, I think it's just single edged. And Highlander just noted that damage can also cause more degradation to happen, and that is absolutely correct. That's what I meant by a combination of both. When you have like a chip in the steel, you're actually exposing more steel to the elements. So here we go. Yep, I was right. Silver inlay. So I say these things without actually double checking the image, so I might be wrong sometimes. Sometimes I'm right. If I seem like a genius, I'm probably not. I probably read the placard, forgot I read the placard, and then made supposition based on that. But yeah, I love how this stuff kind of sits on top of that. Again, when I talked about the Bronze Age swords from Arslan Tepe, I talked about how they had silver inlays, and those are things that actually would have held up a lot better than the rest of the material around it. Silver just doesn't really degrade the same way. It doesn't degrade, sorry. And while parts of it are gone, chipped away, that's more likely caused by the loss of the metal underneath than it is the metal on top. Andre Skobstov asked a non sequitur question: why did knight switch from mail plate to plate if mail seems as good for protection as plate? That's a question of protection against what? So videos on evolution of armor exist out there. I've assisted in some of them. I also did, to some extent, I talked about evolution of armor in a video that's honestly, it's not a very good video. It's one of my older videos. End of the day, plate armor, it came about for reasons extraneous to the things that mail had to go up against. Even up to and including gunfire. There's a documentary series or thing that was done. I wish I could remember where it was, but they were actually testing plate armor against bullets. We're actually going to talk about this later on the stream here. And plate armor was designed to some extent, especially later Middle Ages, to stop bullets, and have done so, and scientifically has been tried on muskets and weapons that are proper for the age and time period and ballistics. So plate armor, for if nothing else, they stopped bullets, which really mattered, and certainly that was a huge driving factor. Swords got better at defeating mail as well, and they got more tapered points to get in between even rings. And it doesn't, I mean, even a good chainmail or good mail, I say chainmail out of habit, but good mail that's riveted, it can still be split. A good sword can get in. I've heard it said, whether or not it's old research or not, that plate also offered some additional protection against concussive blows, that especially in joints, and that's actually some of why you see joints always being, the elbows and the shoulders being some of the initial protection in that kind of transitional period. And I will say this about mail and arrows. I still hold that arrows were probably effective against mail. We know that arrows were very effective in general. We know this from battles like the Battle of Crécy, where that's like the infamous thing that happened there. But a lot of people then would like to point to kind of videos or things that have been done with kind of experimental archaeology, etc., where people use like a longbow and shoot an arrow at a piece of mail and it doesn't pierce. The problem with that is, in my opinion, is that you need a bow of a ridiculous draw weight to actually be able to get any accuracy there in terms of historical accuracy. We know that there are bows that come from the Middle Ages that are upwards of like 150-pound draw weight. I don't have anything directly to reference right now for that, so I apologize. But there are some bows out there that are ridiculously high draw weights. Not to mention when you go to something like crossbows, it gets even worse. It seems to get to like 300 to like 400-pound draw weights, depending on the size of the crossbow. But a person using a bow, pulling it, if they're pulling 150 pounds worth of force back, so when that releases and it sets that arrow in motion, that arrow is going at a higher velocity than it would be if it was just like a 50-pound bow. So if you shoot a 50-pound bow with a proper arrowhead at a piece of mail, it may not pierce it, but triple that, you might actually get some piercing happening there of mail. Not all mail is created equal either. I think that's really worth noting. You're talking about historical mail. Some rings are bigger, some rings are smaller. Some rings are just made better, made more carefully. Some of the rivets are better. So I don't think you can just point to any one example and say this is going to be representative of the entire thing. One person here in chat noting lances as well. Look, when you're looking at the battlefield in general, there's a lot that goes on, and there's a lot to be said for a battlefield press. Let me actually give you an example here. So let's shoot over to this view for a moment. So this is a bec de Corbin. Probably not saying that right. It's a polearm. It's a French name. Short polearm, right? So I'm sitting down. I set it next to me. You can see the head is right here next to me. So here's the thing. If I were to just take this really nice, sharp, pointy tip here and shove it into mail, I could probably pierce and split rings pretty easily right there. Even if I didn't have the sharpest point, or I was just kind of pushing it into an opponent, but there's a battlefield press happening, which means someone is on the front line, and that point is, you know, in their neck, and I'm not holding this anywhere near my neck, but it's right there, and I'm being pressed by people behind me into it. That's adding additional force to this. So there's the force of the person pushing the weapon, and the force of the battlefield push, as it were, the press. And we know that that kind of thing happens, and that's enough to get through mail. It really is. So set this back down. So I think there's a lot of reasons why mail was not sufficient. Mail really worked well against blows from like swords, even axes. It didn't prevent the concussive damage, and you would have like a gambeson or some padded jacket underneath it to help with that. But even then, I mean, it still would hit like a hammer. The mail just was more sufficient against glancing blows, and certainly not against piercing things. So plate started building up in areas to protect against that. So, you know, breastplate is a good example of that. Because now something, you know, hitting you dead square in the chest with a battlefield press, it's going to hit, and it's going to then slide off to one side. A lot of the armor, a lot of the breastplates and whatnot were all designed with the intent of moving off to the side. But that's, you know, this is a long conversation just to go back to. That's why plate was so necessary to show up. One person saying to to Andre that he should check out Knight Errant's YouTube channel. Fully support that. Ian is a great resource for talking about armor. I've actually reached out to him recently to ask about armor because I'm thinking about getting myself a harness, so that'll be fun. All right, back to museum talk. Let's see here. All right. Here are some other weapons. Now, I really took this picture because I wanted to talk about the ring pommel here. As you guys know, the Gallowglass is my all-time favorite sword in my collection. Pretty much my all-time favorite sword to come from Albion. Pretty darn close to being one of my all-time favorite swords, period. Okay, it might be, I don't know. But here you see an original. And you kind of see it for, you know, the bones of it for what it's worth. And it's kind of hard to tell, but there did seem to be some sort of decorative work that had been done on it. It's degraded over time. And this is kind of that fishtail style quillin, which is very similar to like the Albion Kern. There are more pictures of it, so I'm going to... Come on, there we go. Better pictures of other ones. So as you can see, the rings here, where you see the tang going all the way up through. Again, kind of this is actually a very different take. I was actually a little bit surprised by this. I don't know that I've seen this design of cross done a lot, and I don't know that I've seen it in museums a lot, where you actually have the fishtail, but it's not part of the entire cross. It actually only happens at the very tip. I don't really know what the reason is behind that. You can see this is, for all intents and purposes, a two-handed. It's a great sword. It's really large compared to this small arming sword here. And then, you know, I'm looking at my wall for a moment at the Kern. You know, this sword, it's like if you were to take the Kern and the Gallowglass and kind of combine them, you get this arming sword, which is kind of interesting in terms of the choices made and the details. Really beautiful stuff, though. Don't find ring pommel swords many other places. Oh, look what just happened in the chat here. Someone said, say no to pommel puns. And then someone instead just decided to use a pommel meme. There you go. So this was an interesting thing. So this was, I forgot what they called it. They basically called it like the chieftain's sword or whatever. But it's only part of the hilt. You can see the cross here has been broken off at one point. You can see that it's got the quatrefoil design. It's actually not a quattro because it's got a fifth one in there. So is that a pentafoil design? Weird. And then it's really weird pommel. Look at that pommel. Very strange. It has the profile of one of those stress toys, which is, I mean, of all the things to think about when you're looking at a sword, think of like one of those silly little stress toys you squeeze and the eyes bug out. That's what the profile looks like. But we'll actually get back to this one in a moment. So they actually had a reproduction of it, which I thought was really cool. Here's another beautiful hilt assembly. Look at that. Yeah. Love, I mean, I love swords, but I love going to museums and seeing the originals. And then here you actually see, I actually took this picture for a couple of reasons, but the one big one is so many people don't realize a lot of times that pommels can be hollow and very often are hollow. And so this is a perfect example of that. Someone in the chat, Sir Roland, just asked, weren't those ring pommels filled with something? Seems like they might be too light. Yeah, yes. So it is possible. Ring pommels might have had like a coin or something put into it. You can kind of see it over my shoulder there. The Accolade sword from Windlass is actually done exactly that way. But pommels are they are in part about being a counterbalance, but they don't need to be completely solid for that, and they can be hollow, and they can be just an open ring. And to my knowledge, ring pommels are actually exactly that. They are pommels that are intended to be open, and they have enough mass to offset the weight properly. It's not really offset the weight; it's properly distribute the weight to give it a good feel in the hand. So it's a lot of the conversation you can have around this concept of sword dynamics. I would highly suggest people go look up. I think it's Ice and Fire talk that Peter Johnson gave, because he actually does this really cool thing where he shows you the effect of adding mass and removing mass from pommels and what it does to the dynamics of the sword, which is really cool. So this is a recreation. Okay, so they call it the Monasteravan sword. So this is a recreation of the one they had. Again, not a quatrefoil, but a pentafoil. And some nice little detailing. Sorry for the bad resolution. And then you can see a lot better the way this pommel looks. It's a very different pommel design. Very different. Now, this is a shield boss. Look at how beautiful this thing is. How intricate it is, and it's kind of hard to tell, but there's these. Oh, there we go. They got these traced lines around everything, and it's all been put together in this kind of beautiful and very organic. You kind of have like this fleur-de-lis design, but then you got other things going on, and it's just a shield boss. I kind of wonder if it had backing to it, like if that was a layer that sat on top of something. I mean, it really had to in order to be any good protection. But yeah, it's really, really interesting and pretty unique. I don't know that I've seen a shield boss that looked quite like that anywhere else. All right, so all of the pictures I took up to this point were just kind of their like medieval exhibit, but then they had the Clontarf exhibit, the 1014 exhibit, and it's a lot of Viking era weapons because that is the Battle of Clontarf. We could do a whole thing about it, but I want to start looking at these weapons and talk about them, and just appreciate the beauty of them. So let's just kind of start up here with these Viking era, Viking Age swords. These would all be in the what is it, the Peterson typology, and some of them are very plain, like this one being relatively plain. And then some of them have this just beautiful detailing. Look at this knot work. I wish I could zoom in a little more. I can't. Look at the knot work they did on these kind of little metal fittings. The windless Suintaka sword that I have has that kind of, it's the inverse of this, where the center has a little bit of a fitting piece. But that's a thing people would have done. So in between here would have been wood and maybe leather, something to actually fill out the handle. And it's worth noting that, of course, these are very, very short, squat handles, as is the case with most of these type of weapons. What I find interesting, so we know this is probably some sort of gold, probably not solid gold, but some sort of gold overlay. But look how it actually looks like it's actually on the blade here. And I had a hard time really telling, because the color is so similar, if it was a form of rust, which I don't think it is, or if it was actually an overlay. So a golden sword, which is, I mean, really, that's just insane. And I think, again, 1,000 years old. And a pretty basic sword here. So this is what more people would kind of consider to be that very early medieval style sword, as opposed to this kind of more Viking Age style. It's worth knowing that Battle of Clontarf is really the very end of that time period, right? I mean, the height of the Viking movement, and I mean that more, less so about their cultural thing, and more about them as an actual action, them going out and actually Viking and plundering and attacking and all that. That's 800 AD roughly, I think. And then when you get to the kind of time period transition from that kind of dark ages to the Middle Ages, are really getting out of that kind of Viking period, you begin to see swords like these be close together, near each other. And one could be Viking and one could be Norman, right? In the way people talk about it. Here's a nice axe on a haft. I don't know if that haft is original, but it would seem to be. Seeing as how I don't know why they would even try to put a haft in that heavily degraded slot there. But if that is actually, if that's actually original, look at how it tapers. Look at how these things taper. And I don't really know the reason behind that. I honestly don't. So, really interesting stuff. A little tiny axe head down here. What is this, an axe for ants? What's going on there? It's kind of funny. Small little hatchet, essentially. So really big axes, little tiny axe head. For those of you in the chat who are saying you wish you could quit watching, this should be up on my channel to watch later. So feel free to not watch soon. Go get sleep. It's not a bad thing to do. Someone said that it could be that the axe head was buried deep into the ground. Yes, possible. Oh, here's a good, nice close-up version. Let's let the resolution catch up. You can see better of the detailing there. One of the things I unfortunately didn't have with me was a really good camera when I was traveling to take these. So this is all off of a phone. Sorry. You can actually see in this blade where there was, it could be an engraving, it could have been an inlay. It's kind of hard to tell, but there was some kind of wording put in here. It's not Ulfbert, from what I can tell, but certainly it's a cause of some sort of additional detailing done on the blade, which has caused this almost runic looking degradation pattern. I mean, this is obviously runes. You can see the outline of it. If you look at runes at all, you can kind of see what it looks like. So Here are some different hilt fittings they had. Some beautiful pommels there. Really basic, but again, you get close up and you get to see some of the details that would have existed. You know, this might just be a little gaping hole, but it might have been enameled with something. I mean, who knows, right? And this looks like it's not metal, but some kind of bone. The question was, do I have these photos available off stream? Yes, I will eventually put these things in the description of the video of this version that gets posted permanently on YouTube. So I will have it out there right now for the purposes of the stream. It's just here. I wanted to take a picture of this pommel of this sword for a very specific reason. So a lot of people don't know this about Viking era weapons. There were, I think, 3 different ways that pommels ended up being made, and some had these kind of decorative cap pieces. So what would have actually happened is the tang of this blade would come up through this piece and be peened down. So you'd have the peen there. But then to hide the peen, they would put a little decorative cap over it, and they would rivet it down on the underside. So you'd have rivets on the underside. Now, anyone who's looked at Viking swords that are made properly there's some makers out there who do just some absolutely beautiful work. What's his name? Andre. I forgot his name. I'm gonna look it up real quick because I think it's important to call him out for the amazing work he does. Andre Anderson. Andre Anderson's swords. He does some beautiful swords, and his Viking Age ones, I have seen a few where he actually follows the proper creation methodology, right? The proper capping for it, which or one of the proper cappings for it. And then you can see some of the decorative detailing here on that piece. And then amazingly, here are some original scabbards. So you can see the original leather scabbards. You can see them, the stitching points. You can see how they have fallen apart over time. Some of these have detailing on them. Some are just worn. I think there's another one that I might have a picture of later that actually has some really intricate detailing. Beautiful stuff. So here's a close-up of that sword I was just talking about, but we'll move on. All right. Who out there is an Ulfbert fan? So that's exactly what this is. I'll let you soak that up and appreciate it. My eyes widened when I saw this on display. So I'm going to start at the top here, the pommel piece. Really basic detailing. Now, you know, one of the problems with Ulfbert is that there were people making cheap knockoffs of them. And the cheap knockoffs are sometimes akin to like a Gucci purse in the modern age, where you'll have the Gucci and then you'll have someone make a purse called like, you know, Gucci or something that changes one letter or puts an emphasis mark so they don't quite break the brand, the trademarking. Same thing happened with Ulfbert, and I'm kind of turning my head sideways, but you should be able to see, I believe, there's actually a space in between where the T is happening and all that. I believe this is actually an original Ulfbert, but there's the sword in its entirety. It's in really good condition, as you can see. People asking about estimated dates on these swords. I don't know off the top of my head. This is all a display of things from roughly the 1014 period. It's possible these swords are obviously much older than that. Someone said it's a quite small pommel. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of variety. I honestly think it's not just so much a small pommel, but it's actually a pretty wide blade down here, relatively speaking, in terms of proportions. And notice how much it tapers as well, as opposed to having much more parallel edges. There's a close-up of it. There we go. Oof, B-E-R-H, something in between of it's kind of hard for me to tell if this is the T right here or if this is the T. Normally I think that this might then be a knockoff when I look at it closer, because normally it would be Ulfber and then a cross and then a T. Ulfber cross T. And this seems to be the opposite of it. Either way, knockoff or not, it's a beautiful sword and an interesting little kind of side piece of sword history. They had a pretty large display of Viking era swords. They have one here that's bent. This is a very common thing for the Vikings to do to swords for a variety of reasons, but it was often seen along with burials. I've heard a lot of different conflicting reasons why it may be. Some people say they bend swords because it was an enemy they were burying and they didn't want the enemy to have a usable sword in the afterlife. I've heard it said they would bend the swords so that people being buried wouldn't have their graves robbed. I don't really know the reason. I'm sure there's some historian out there who does know a lot better. I want to zoom in up here on the detailing on this hilt here, though. Look at that. And it's just beautiful. You know, a lot of people complain about the size of tangs. And for good reason. You know, a bigger, thicker tang is going to hold up better. I know this has been just a huge discussion for like dark sword armory. But I want to take a moment to look at the differences between these two tangs. Now, you can see there might be a little bit of loss here on this one from degradation. It's possible, but I think it's probably likely. But even so, you know, here's a thinner tang and here's a thinner tang. And all these are degraded to some extent. But I think it is completely possible that tangs came in a lot of various sizes. And that would have some material impact on the quality of the sword. So they could be, it's very possible that people in the Middle Ages were having the exact same complaints about a certain maker. Oh, did you see Clothar's swords? They break. Their tangs are too small. Need to quit buying Clothar brand swords. Need to go for those Ulfberts. Some more detailing. As you can see, this would actually be butted up against a separate piece that would have been the cross or the pommel. No, that would have been the cross because this is the shoulder, and then this is the pommel piece. But look at the detailing on the handle and the grip. Again, closer detailing for this one. Look at the design here. So obviously it would have kind of capped over like something else. And we can get a closer up here where you can see it entering. Looks like there's a bit of a gap there. More pictures of hilts. This one's not too dissimilar from one of the other ones we saw. And then this was the overall picture of the display. As you can see, there were just a lot of different things on display. Some shield bosses and whatnot. Here's an example of an overlay piece. So this is actually like, would have been silver or some precious metal that had been folded over the cross piece. So likely an iron or probably an iron core, and then detailing put around it. Really beautiful. Another pommel. Now this actually is I believe this would be a pommel cap. So exactly what I was talking about, where they would actually have the peen go through and they'd add the cap piece. This would be a cap piece because you can see there's no place for there to be a peen or any obvious peen at the top. More Viking era pieces. More beautiful gold detailing on swords. It's just insane. Keep in mind, guys, this is all one museum. Is the chat on the screen not correct? Is it not scrolling? Let me see something real quick, guys. Yeah, for some reason my chat on my stream isn't scrolling. So give me a moment. I'm gonna go fix that if I can. It should be scrolling. Like I said, you know, I'm trying to get this to work, but I don't always have everything set up properly. Interesting. Well, that's unfortunate. How do I make this work? Oh dear. See, I thought my chat was going this entire time. Always fun when it doesn't work exactly like you want it to. So I'm using a piece of software called Game Show, and it has some pretty useless features, unfortunately. All right, well, I kind of wish I could have this running. That would be really nice. I think it's important for people to be able to see what other people are saying as this is going, you know. Let's do some troubleshooting here. See if I can't figure out what's going on. So I'm reading something that says I need the there's ways to fix it, but I'm not seeing it. That's really unfortunate. Oh well. Did my stream die? Or is it going, guys? Hopefully my stream is still running. Having some weird problems here. Alright, sorry. Going back. I'm going to go ahead and just hide the chat since it's obviously not working. And if I can find a way to get that working later, I will. Okay, so here's some other leather scabbard pieces for like small daggers. And these are leather. I think I saw one thing in the chat ask if it was wood core. I think most of them aren't actually. And then here is a sword scabbard with some detailing on it. So it's nice seeing some of the leather and textiles that results in some really good stuff there. Sorry, I really want to get this chat fixed. It's really annoying me now. Got like a strong desire to get it working. Tell you what, guys, I need a quick break anyway, so I'm gonna call it a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll be back on the chat shortly after that. All right, I am back. I'm going to see if I can't get this chat thing going, but it looks like I've managed to actually not just disable the chat, but flat out kill it somehow, which is interesting. So, who knows how that happened? Oh well. That'll be something for me to fix next time, I guess. All right, going back to looking at some of these museum pictures. Here's a interesting mace design, flange mace. You can see it's all kind of one solid piece. Now this is actually a skull, and I'm not going to show it for too long because I think there's probably some issue with showing human remains to some extent, I'm sure. But this is actually a blow done with a sword right here. So if there's any question of whether or not swords can actually cut through bone, there's your answer. It is believed to be a sword, not an axe. All right. Anyway, that was the National Museum in Ireland. Absolutely a beautiful museum. Has a lot of really awesome stuff. It's in Dublin. Never been there. Go there. I will note that I feel as though let me see how I want to word this. I think that Dublin has some of the best collection of museums in an area. I mean, France is kind of hard to beat with that, honestly. But I feel like Dublin has a nice variety. And one of the museums that I went to was the art museum there. I got lucky to go to this art museum because, or when I went to it, because they were doing an exhibition specifically of Frederick Burton. And for those of you who don't know who that is, I don't necessarily blame you. But he did my all-time favorite painting, which I'm throwing up on the screen right now. And that is The Meeting on the Turret Stairs. Absolutely one of my all-time favorite paintings. And it's a watercolor, which is just insane. But they were doing an exhibition of his work, and so this one was kind of like the centerpiece. It was right there, and I got to see it in person. It's actually a bucket list item checked off my list, and it's as amazing in person as it is to look at here. It's actually maybe more so amazing. It's incredibly vibrant in its color, and I am absolutely amazed at just how beautiful it is in person. So if you're in Dublin and you haven't, go check out the exhibit on Frederick Burton, especially because this painting specifically is very often put away most of the time because watercolor is very susceptible to light, and so it's very rare. They only open it like a couple times a week for viewing. So good stuff. All right, so like I said, I was in Ireland, and then I ended up going to the Netherlands over Christmas. My brother lives there, and I went to go with the rest of my family to go stay in Groningen for, I think it was 9 days. I think we were actually there for like 7 days because we spent the last couple days in Amsterdam. Now, Groningen's a beautiful little town, great places to eat, just wonderful things to do. Not a lot in terms of museums, though, so I don't really have anything to bring from that. But when I went to Amsterdam, I did get to go to the Rijksmuseum. Now, the Rijksmuseum is just too large, way too big. So, I think I have something to say before I get into the Rijksmuseum stuff about size of museums. And what I will say is this: sometimes I think museums get too big. And what I mean by that is you don't always have the ability to go and back to a museum day after day after day. And museums have a lot of art and a lot of artifacts. You want to be able to spend time to appreciate them and not feel like you're having to rush through to see everything. And so there's a part of me that kind of wishes that the idea of a mega museum would go away and that large museums would section off and become more focused. and have their own curation teams, and maybe spread out a bit more. So you don't have to go to Amsterdam to find the museums, all the museums for the Netherlands, right? You could actually have one in Groningen that actually has some original pieces or something. So as you travel around, you actually get to see the things, and you get to spend more time seeing the things. That's going to be my one little thing. Now, I know that kind of flies in the face of the way most museum curators want to be, because they're, to some extent, museums are collections, right? It'd be like someone telling me, hey, you have a lot of swords behind you. You should really send those swords to some of your viewers, so the swords can be spread out and people can have swords everywhere. Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to do that, right? All right, let's talk about the Rijksmuseum. I really took pictures from a couple different places throughout the museum. They had a section that was fully like medieval weaponry, that kind of thing, or at least they had like an armory section. But there were pieces spread out as well. So here's an example, like a clothes helm. This was in just a display among some other things. It's a pretty, as far as clothes helms go, it's pretty basic. You can see the kind of connection pieces for all of it, how it would be put on. Again, highly recommend people go to the Knight Errant channel, to Ian's channel for a lot of armor related topics. He actually did one not too long ago that was about the changeover for clothes helms compared to like great helms, and how instead of slipping the helmet over your head, you're actually sandwiching it, your head in between the pieces and locking it down. And so yeah, it is a beautiful, beautiful helmet, but it's also a very basic helmet, which I think is pretty neat. And I've always, one of my favorite things about this kind of style clothes helm is the ridge and how the slide piece, when it slides back, the visor would actually slide back over that ridge. It's one of those details I like. And of course, it's hearts, so it's kind of like the My Little Pony of helmets, I guess. I don't know. Or Raji from is it Raji from Captain Planet, who had the useless elemental skill of heart? Anyway, I might be thinking of Johnny Quest now. How terrible of me. All right, so let's see. So you can see here's the helmet in the display. It was actually a display for this fellow right here. He was I think he was kind of master of arms, and so this is some of his stuff. And so it's interesting because here's the thing with a bunch of guns and a clothes helm, right? And here's some powder bags. There you go. Look at that. Glorious Trebuchet says, use this to keep up your sustenance, in all caps. Right now, my sustenance is water. Oh, yeah. I like water. Yeah, so, here's the combination, though. You have, late period armor and guns. These things existed together for a few hundred years, guys. Most people just don't really ever consider it. They don't think about it. Were there armors when they were using matchlocks? I don't think armor was in heavy use. No, I think this is actually a piece from his personal collection. You're correct that a matchlock style, or more like the flintlock style that some of these are, probably not so much. But keep in mind that okay, I think I'm back. Hopefully I'm back now. Sorry, guys. I think my internet just died for like a brief second, and it killed the stream. Okay, so you think about the founding of America, or the finding of America, as it were, not the founding so much. When people are coming into the States, or what is now the United States, coming into the New World, they had guns that were like flintlock, matchlock, those type of things. That's what, 1492, right? That's when Columbus being there, 1492, 1493. Well, but I mean, that's still the Middle Ages to some extent, right? So yes, there were guns with these types of mechanisms in existence. Now, I'm not a firearms expert, so I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm completely wrong in that. All right, so here's here's an interesting piece of armor that was on a wall very high up. Actually, you can see from the angle. I had to kind of like lean back and take that photo. And it's got this sword. Anyone recognize this kind of sword design? So many people have cheap replicas of that kind of sword. And the armor here, I'm going to look up real quick the name of the guy who wore the armor, because it's quite a story, I must say, if I can find it. Would really like to find it, because I remember this guy's name and now I've forgotten it. Oh well. This armor was used in the battlefield, and it's missing this cuisse part over here because the guy who was wearing it died because a cannonball hit him. So yeah, armor doesn't do much against cannonballs. So it took out his kind of left side and his left leg, and he died from the wounds. But there you go. There's a piece of armor that saw real battle and then subsequently saw its person die. All right. These were in a section about some like naval time periods, and I only took pictures because you got a little bit of a nice kind of classic, in my opinion, very classic style halberd here, and then of course you have a rapier hilt. And again, we're talking about the Rijksmuseum here, so the section where they had these two items was not the armory section. It's just like the things scattered all over the place. I really was very fascinated by this chain, or this mail shirt. So I almost said chainmail. I'm trying to break myself that habit of this mail shirt. One of the things that really kind of I thought was very interesting was the collar aspect to it, where I would imagine there'd be some way of binding it so it actually choked up on the neck a bit more. But yeah, it had this little collar, and from afar, it almost looks like a weirdly knitted modern sweater or something, right? Like someone knitted a collared shirt. But it's not. It's actually mail shirt right there. And I talk a lot, or actually it's weird. I guess I haven't done a lot of conversations about mail on my channel. I used to make mail, and I did it with like the butted method. I didn't actually rivet, and I did it a lot of like more artistic things, like made like banners and whatnot. And one of the things that has always kind of annoyed me is the flow of mail. There's a natural contraction for mail. So when you see it going horizontally this way, what that is it allows the rings to expand and contract a bit. But the vertical here, going straight down, it hangs, and it bunches. Instead of expanding and contracting, it bunches up. And so when you have sleeve pieces, there are ways to do sleeves to contract properly and ways to do it not. I used to be of the mindset that you should actually change the direction of the sleeves, but then I realized because the way you bend your arm, it actually would contract more than bunch up, which is actually what you'd want. So this is the proper way to make a mail shirt. There are different patterns out there that have been made in the past, but I definitely find it fascinating, especially because of the collar pieces. I don't think that's normal. Could be wrong. I don't think that's normal. Close up of it. Here is a crank-based crossbow. The area I was taking these pictures in was really dark, and so I'm pretty sure that this one picture I took is just really fuzzy. But massive crossbow. I wish I could tell you how big it is, but the only way I can really give you that is you see the shoulder and you actually see this silhouette of the shirt. Imagine this is a person. This is the crossbow. Any questions? And then this is a helmet. It's actually the back side of the helmet. and it's in pretty good condition for what it is. You can see it's, how it was hammered into shape and all of that. I don't really have a lot to say about it. Just thought it was kind of an interesting thing to be found in. Oh, where was this? This was like in an area that was near like a lot of really odd baubles and trinkets, but there were also some. It was a medieval art section actually. So actually a lot of interesting medieval art. I did not take a ton of pictures of medieval art because I would have been there all day taking pictures. They had a lot of it. I think I took one of a very interesting one. Here is a rondel dagger and a bollocks dagger right next to each other. So that's fun. Again, fuzzy picture. This is actually, I believe, a triangular shape, but it's kind of hard to tell. And I believe the bollocks dagger is kind of as well. It's got this kind of chunk taken out of it. I thought it was pretty interesting. Look at the shape of the grip of this, how it flares so much towards the end. I found that pretty interesting on this one. Good old bollocks dagger. Someone's overcompensating for something. Here's a slightly better picture of it. But again, this area was very dark. It was very hard to get a good picture. Of course, I'm not going to use flash, so I tried to get just the right amount of light on it. And close-up of this rondel. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that wasn't triangular. Doesn't look triangular. So this is a shield. Real deal proper shield with paint on it and everything. You can see they put a lot of decorations on it, and they had their crest so people could identify. And then there's another one here as well, with what looks like a big chunk taken out of the corner here. And that's not intentional from what I can tell. Interesting pieces. So I took this picture of a siege because I wanted to talk a bit about medieval art and their concepts of perspective because they're really bad at it. But yeah, I love the way they have all this set up. Glorious Trebuchet didn't say anything other than to just say goodbye. But goodbye, I assume good night, or wherever you're headed, Mr. Trebuchet. I appreciate your support, and I appreciate your viewership. Cheers. But yeah, so the design of this is fascinating, and I actually took a picture of this just for my own ability to go back and kind of look at it in more detail. But the scale is very obvious. You can see it's a multi-sectioned wall. So you have an outer wall, an inner wall. You have people doing various things. Fires on the inside, armies on the outside. And there was so much art like this there. Again, it's almost hard to take time to appreciate it all. So, anyway, that was pretty interesting. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what this is? Let's see if chat can throw any guesses before I tell them. I know there's a slight delay. While they're doing that, I'm going to see if I can get this chat thing working. Don't think I can. Someone said armor. No, that's not the right answer, actually. I mean, it is armor. It's a depiction of armor. Anyone want to make a different guess? Parade armor? No. Oh, I thought I had a picture. So this is actually the masthead of a ship. Let me see if I can find it. I thought I had a picture of myself standing next to it. But maybe I don't. Maybe I have a picture of my wife standing next to it. Either way, I think I have a picture of someone standing next to it. So let me see if I can find that real quick. Because if I can, I'll throw that up on the screen here. Ah, yes, here we go. So, there we go. There's my wife standing next to it. Really quite large. So I thought it was pretty cool. Many ships had different kinds of many kinds of things they'd put on their mastheads. You know, they'd have a big lion or a mermaid or I don't know, a shark or something, but a big piece of armor. Pretty neat. Yeah, literally decorative armor. This was an interesting little knife that was in their nautical section. They didn't have anything describing what it was, but I assume it's some sort of kitchen knife. No, I'm just kidding. It's probably some sort of offensive weapon, but it is really strange looking. This little spike down here would be pretty nasty to hit someone with. But it's curved in almost the exact same way a kitchen preparation knife is, which I think is pretty silly. All right, I wanted to talk about this because this was amazing to me. These are guns. Look at how many of them there are, by the way. You know, there are a dozen of them. They're guns that are made out of ivory, or at least the stocks are. Pistols. And there are just tons of them. They're all designed slightly differently. Some had helmets on. Look at that carving, though. It's a beautiful gun. The amount of artistic work that went into weapons is something that I think is completely lost in the modern age. You know, everything is tactical now. No one views this as as a representation of the individual anymore, which I think is something that's lost, honestly. And you can see in the background here, there are a lot of guns on clear cases and whatnot. This was the armory room. They had guns and swords from all different time periods laid out on display. A lot of guns, and all very ornate, very beautiful. You know, I'm very much a sword person, but I can appreciate good art in all of its forms, even when it comes in the form of a gun. I am a gun user and a gun owner, but they're not my passion, per se. But I can see being passionate about this. Really cool stuff. Here's a full suit of armor. You can see this is a very late period armor because it's got only very few gaps in it. Most areas, except for the key ones, are actually pretty much completely covered. It's gorgeous. Very simple, very gorgeous. I love my simplicity in pretty much everything, including armor. What I find interesting is actually the size of the waist compared to the breastplate. The documentary I was talking about, where they were using guns and whatnot, I actually spoke to some of this. That a lot of breastplates, especially in late period armor, would actually be doubled up, so you could actually have like almost like it's like laminate armor, right? Like you have two pieces of armor butted up against each other. So when a bullet hits it, even if it pierces the first one, it loses all the momentum to get through the second one. Pardon me. And so the waist being very small here compared to the larger upper body piece is probably because there's more of a gap in between that also supports, you know, the padding and all of that, and anything they'd be wearing underneath it. Here are some polearms on display. You can see bill hooks and boar spears and crescent moon spears. I don't even know if there's a proper name for those. And a very ornate halberd here. But the one I actually want to talk about is this one right here, the man catcher. I love how ridiculous this, call it, non-lethal weapon is. The concept being that you're going to jab this at someone's neck. If you miss, you're probably going to slit their throat with these blades on either side. But if you have really good aim, their neck is going to go in here, and these are little spring mechanisms that will pull back, and their neck will pop in this nice little hole here, and these will pop behind their neck, and now they're caught. It's we have a modern version of this that dog catchers use, right? You know, essentially you're just putting something on a leash at the end of a pole, but in this case it's a person. It's a pretty nasty thing. I kind of wonder, in the history of the world, how many people were successfully caught with it, and how many people were stabbed through the neck. This is actually another suit of armor. No, it's the same suit of armor, sorry. Different angle. And then here's this halberd. Look at how beautiful the kind of cutouts and how this was designed. But it also, to some extent, looks like it's stamped. And this gets to a time period, a time frame where it gets harder to tell where kind of the old way of making things versus like a new way uh, comes in. But I still think it's a really fascinating, very decorative halberd with that kind of crescent moon blade there. Long shafted spear with a central ridge. So here's another one. You can actually see it's a different halberd there, different one there, but different pole arms. Oh, and I will note, look at this spear. Like, the ornateness gets in the way of the usefulness, I think, pretty quickly. Another suit of armor. This one has much longer cuisses down here on the side. I don't think I noticed that before, but that should be a connection piece for resting a lance as well. So this is an example of some of the work done on the guns. This is a huge kind of oak haft for all this, and it's been decoratively carved. As you can see, it's kind of like there's a lion in it. The lion's head is on the other side, I believe, but you can see its haunches here, its tail. And this is actually a gun rest. What's hard to tell is the relative size of this gun. This is a really big gun. I think I have a picture elsewhere that shows length, but if I were to stand this gun up on end, it'd probably be taller than me. It's probably larger than 6 feet from stock to end of barrel. So it definitely need the rest. I think this is like the ye old 50 cal, you know, as it were. So I did take some pictures of the larger swords. I actually posted one of these on the community section of my channel. They had a lot of the large kind of Zweihander style swords. Someone asking which museum. This is the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. So here's a couple pictures. So I'll zoom in here. So this sword actually had paint put on its blade to commemorate an event in 1573, as you can see right here. But it's a very large sword. All these are. And you know, some of them are pretty basic in their design. Go to the next picture. Again, pretty basic. This one's got the full wooden handle still on it. Look how big and thick that gets in the center of it. Really big grip. Yeah, so some of these are likely more along the lines of bearing swords. You're correct. But I think theoretically they are supposed to also be functional swords. They're large. I'll show you the one that I think is the bearing sword. These I would think could be argued as being functional Zweihanders. This one right here on the right hand side is really big. I think you'd be hard pressed to call that one truly functional. You can actually see there's a couple of these that are missing their crosses. Now I'm not really sure like why or what happened, or even if they ever even had crosses. I mean, who knows? But you can see kind of the bare blade on the handle, and that's it. Now, it's hard to really understand the size of these swords. I do have a picture somewhere of me standing next to one. I'll try to find it. Here is a coral hilted sword. Again, very decorative, but carved coral. And here it is with a couple of other different types of swords, basically sabers. Look at the implementation of that hilt, though, of this sword right here. There's an incredible amount of craftsmanship that goes into something like that. It really is. More swords. It almost sounds like I'm exhausted by looking at swords. That's almost how it feels when you get to the point where you're seeing so many of these. You almost become numb to the appreciation of it, which is a very sad thing. Look at this one. Sorry for the graininess of the footage or the pictures. This is, of course, a low-lit area in the museum. Here are some other various guns and swords. Big blunderbuss right here. It's a fun one. And really, I took this picture, even though there are swords there is a sword over there. I took this picture because of this. Look at just the detailing on the stocks of these guns. Really just incredible. The richness that people must have had, not just in terms of wealth, but just in trying to create something is really interesting. Here's a Chris. Very ornate. You can see it's got a pattern weld to the blade. It's got this interesting little gap from the blade to where the handle meets. I think it's kind of interesting. And then a very, very ornate scabbard sheath for it. And, there's not the same. There are multiple of these. Again, very well, oddly and interesting marbled patterned blade. A little bit more simple on the grip. Another one. Really beautiful craftsmanship. And look at the wave on this blade. That's a rather extreme wave on this one. Now this, anyone want to hazard a guess as to what this is? Leave it up on the screen for a moment. I know again the chat is slightly behind the stream here. Let's see if people can guess. While people are guessing, Fatty Taicho says, we are seeing a lot of ornate swords. I thought only rich could afford these kinds of swords. Were swords not as expensive? I'm led to believe they are. Swords are like cars. You can get cheap cars, you can get expensive cars. Matthew Jensen got it right with his guess, and so did a lot of other people, which is cool. He said Final Fantasy VIII. Matt did. Yes, Matt, Final Fantasy VIII. It is a gunblade. Final Fantasy VIII, by the way, in my opinion, the best of the Final Fantasy games. I say that as someone not a huge fan of the Final Fantasy games, so take that for what you will. It is, in fact, a flintlock sword. Here you go. Here it is in its entirety. But to finish answering the question on the price of swords, I think there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn between the automobile market and the sword market. That is to say, if I go out and I spend $140,000 to buy a Tesla, and my friend goes out and he spends $60,000 to buy a brand new pickup truck with all of the features, and another one of my friends goes out and buys a $4,000 car for that's it's got 200,000 miles on it. It smokes a bit out the tailpipe because it's old and it's parts of it are rusted. They will all get you from point A to point B, but some of them will do it with more style. And the difference between those is my nice Tesla, or let's say I were to go buy like a Ferrari, which almost all Ferraris are kind of handmade to some extent. That Ferrari will have some intrinsic value forever because of what it is. And even when it gets older, it will retain some of that value. The person buying the $60,000 truck in 10 years will turn around and sell it for, $4,000 aftermarket, right? Or like it's an old beat up truck at that point. And the person who can afford to spend $4,000 to get what was a $60,000 truck will do so. And swords are much the same way. It's not like when swords were bought, they then ceased to exist. They would be handed down generation to generation. They would be repurposed. They'd be resold. They'd be added to an armory. They'd be removed from an armory. They'd see battlefield combat. They wouldn't see battlefield combat. Some people would spend inordinate amounts of money and never actually use it in combat. Some people would spend enormous amounts of money and use it in combat. All of these things would add to or detract from the value or the usefulness of the sword. But the market of swords was always there, and there were always new ones being made, and there were always old ones still existing. And until they broke or got damaged beyond repair or got lost, they were in market for all intents and purposes. So I always kind of draw that parallel for cars and swords. And I actually likewise draw parallels to some extent with like houses or car. You can even do cars as well, and armor, because it's very much the same way. There's different levels for these things. But the idea of this weapon, the flintlock sword, and I'll be right back, because it's hard to find replicas of these, but I actually have a replica. Cheap. It's a Denix replica of a little tiny flintlock boarding saber. But the idea of this is essentially you can get at least one shot off, and then you have something to fight with past that. So it works as a sword, but you have that gun for that one shot, and you'd aim and shoot. If it was real, that would hit a flint, and that would fire off at least one round down the length of the blade, and then you'd have the sword to fight with. So I've always found it very fascinating, again, because I liked Final Fantasy VIII. It was kind of the main thing. They had a gun blade, is what they called it. A little revolver with a big old blade on it, in very much the Japanese fashion. And so I've always kind of been fascinated by it. So when I saw that, I was really excited. More different types of basic kind of cutlass saber designs. They're actually small, almost like boarding swords. So I took this picture of the sword, and then I looked down and I realized this gun was super wonky. There's a gun that had been damaged. Had been bent out of shape. Pretty interesting. But again, you feel like you're getting numb, but take a moment to appreciate the design and the implementation of these swords. It's really beautiful stuff. Alright. Zoom thing needs to go away so I can click next. There's the bent gun. Little tiny dagger. It has like this little weird, I think it's supposed to be like a goose or a swan or dragon. I don't even know. The little tiny teeth. Looks frightening. I really have no idea what that's supposed to be, but really interesting detailing on the sword. It's actually, sorry, not a sword, but a dagger, small dagger. So we talked about armor. We talked about guns and how they existed together. Here's an example of a piece of armor that took 2 shots. The placard at the site or at the museum said that it was likely that these shots did actually penetrate, and this is afterwards the holes were repaired. It's completely possible that the person wearing this actually survived. I don't remember. I think they might have, because it's possible there's a piece behind this and it would have slowed the bullet down just enough. But it made a big hole, so they had to go repair it. You can see they basically just filled it in, but the 2 holes are still very apparent. Big old rack of different spears, various kinds and decorative elements. This one in the middle really stood out to me, because I swear I've seen something like that in the Assassin's Creed games before. But to have these originals to be fair, this is like open air. This is just on a rack that's sitting against a wall in just one room randomly. Noah Derrick says it looks like a psychotic duck. Yes, it does. That dagger handle looked like a duck. This is a display case of it was General? I don't remember. Captain? Some person in a Napoleonic era army. And these were all of his weapons and pieces of gear on display, up and including a drum that he used to play, or a couple drums, I don't know. I thought it was a really fantastic display. I need to do something like that. But this thing was huge. It was tall. If I walked up to it, I think this was my eye level, was right in the middle of it. And then check out these guns. Big guns. Near a small cannon. To give you an idea of scale, I'm 6 feet tall. I probably would have come up to where this line of shadow is on the display case. You can see the person in the background here, but if they were to walk up, they'd be much larger. Had some nice swords I'll take a close-up of in a moment. But yeah, I thought these guns were just ginormous. I thought what was interesting about these weapons, they're very decorative, as you can see. Sorry, the resolution isn't better. Very decorative. But this one in particular was very interesting because it had this kind of like a crystal handle here. I thought it was very unique. Close up of that. It was a basic. Oh, I've lost the term for this type of dagger. Oh well. It had a bone handle. And then in this one weird small little corner of the Rijksmuseum, they actually had a section that was for Indian and Asian cultures, and they had some pieces to Japanese weapons, specifically like Subas here. I could try to zoom in. They, pretty basic. Some of them pretty nice. Really weird. There's some monkeys. Not interesting patterns on some of them. Really just very interesting, beautiful pieces. You can see some close-ups here, but I already kind of zoomed in on the other ones. And they also had some of the other pieces that go into the handles. I'm not good with the terminology for Japanese swords, so I'm sure if Matt is still on, he will start spouting off all the different pieces. Really ornate dagger here. The Kozuka. Thank you, Matt. See, I knew I could rely on you. So the next series of swords, there's actually this display that was kind of a circular corkscrew style display of all the swords, and a bunch of small swords on it. So I'm just going to kind of flip through them. Sorry, I'm not going to hold on them too long. Most of them are pretty basic as far as small swords go. This one is really ornate with some enameling done on it, and maybe even some gold inlay. It's very yellow though. Makes you think it's more of like an enamel. Oop. Another basic kind of small. Really not even what you'd call that kind of sword. Seems almost quasi-ceremonial. Another small sword. All these have wire wrapping. Really beautiful hilts. For those who don't know, one of my favorite things about the way that small swords are done, someone just said silver hilted. Yes. So swords, small swords in general, were actually made in 2 steps. You'd have a bladesmith make the blade, and they would make them in bulk. And those blades would be shipped out to silversmiths, who would then cast and mold the hilt assembly for it. So it was actually very common for like an American's like Revolutionary War era small sword to the blades who have come from like France, where they made the blades, they shipped them over in mass, and then people in the U.S., the silversmiths made the sword overall with all this the silver molding and work, which makes it very ornate and beautiful, and also then very useful and deadly. So yes, a lot of those. This is the large sword. The cross here is kind of bent back. Obviously, it's not supposed to be that way, but that's how it's ended up. There's a piece here of what looks to be like an actual metal for the grip that would have been on the back side of the center seam of the grip. Ornate halberd. I want to see if I have all these close-ups of these large swords we've already looked at. I want to see if I can find a picture of me next to it. I think I'm cycling through some of the same ones again. That's not good. Oh, here we go. So, real quick, here's all the guns I was talking about. The ornate ones. The one with the lion that I had taken a picture of is right here. And you can see how large that gun is compared to the people here in the background. But here I am standing next to this ginormous sword. So if I were to step up onto the platform this sword is on, I would still be, my head would be still below the pommel. It's larger than 6 feet tall. Yeah, I don't know how the cross ended up like that. It's very interesting, very wonky. But the blade is just absolutely massive. And that's actually one of the things I want to talk about the scale here. You know, you look at my face, you look at the size of the blade. It's like a 5-inch wide blade or something. Not 5 inch. That's not right. Let's call it 4-inch wide blade. Yeah, really big though, and it's kind of hard to tell in this perspective because it's being taken at an angle. But the blade was really thick. Like it's at least as wide as my hand was. Really, really, just a large sword. Can't imagine if that was used in battle, the strength of the person using that. It'd be very exhausting. Here I am looking at that display. This is a picture my wife snapped of me because I was not paying any attention to her when she was trying to get me to pose with it. Back to some of the armor, but I think that pretty much wraps up. I did take some detailed shots of the armor, as you can see. But I don't want to get too deep into the live stream here because we're past the 2-hour mark here talking about museums. How crazy is that? So I want to go ahead and just take the opportunity or the moment here to go ahead and maybe go into some Q&A time and talk about whatever. So it's kind of open floor. So I've been only kind of glancing over at the chat here for the past couple of minutes. But I do have an armory camera set up. Let me get that up here. So I do have the ability to walk around my armory a bit. And so let's do it, guys. Question, answer, hangout time. What do you got for me? I will note, while I do have a little bit of a lead, I don't have a huge lead to walk around my armory, so I can do it if I can. Our avant-garde student said Guts could use it. Yeah. One of my all-time... I'm not very much an anime person, but one of my all-time favorite animes is most certainly Berserk. Good manga, too. Obviously, the manga's... You can argue the manga's better, but it's also really extreme sometimes. What's my favorite non-sword item I have? From Mukuli Wanderer. Non-sword? I don't know. That's really difficult. I am a pretty big fan of the poleaxe back there. The Arms and Armor poleaxe. I don't know. I own a lot of swords, so they tend to be my more favorite thing. But I guess I'd have to say that poleaxe. The Leo Mono behind me is pretty cool, though. Is that a halberd in the back? Is that halberd a cold steel? Yes. So this halberd right behind me that's kind of the matte black is one of the MAA halberds. Someone said the artwork is amazing. Which artwork? Avant-garde. The mail is very cool. Do you think the market would respond well to historical replica sword that included the lack of symmetry and roughness you might find in medieval swords? Matt, that's a really good question. I would say yes, but in only very specific circumstances. You get a lot of that roughness from some makers out there who do custom work. However, a lot of them pride themselves on being very clean in the work they do. So, you know, these days you get amazing work done and it's not rough. You know, it's kind of hard to really say how rough medieval swords really were in terms of polish and finish. Um, but I do know that there are um, some companies out there that try to have an aesthetic that's a little bit different, a little bit less than, or a little bit more rough looking. I would actually argue that the Windless Battle Cry line is like that. That their weird applique bluing effect that they do, that kind of marble look, is meant to kind of give it this look of more aged or um, ancient design, even though it's still pretty basic fit and finish, really. I would also say that I know that Dark Sword for a while was actually trying to do a series of swords that were intentionally distressed to look like they were artifacts, essentially. Not really trying to sell them as artifacts; they were just trying to sell them as like, so you could buy it and you could say it looks like an artifact. I can actually see if I can find that. I don't. They might still have. Not that you know, not that Dark Sword has managed to keep keep a lot of people happy with them these days, but I know they did have that at one time. Let's see if I can find that. I feel like they still had that last time I looked. Don't remember what they called it though. Yeah, I don't remember. It was a very specific thing they were doing though, to try to kind of give that slightly different aesthetic. Avant-garde student asked, "Do you think they have a team of artists working on swords like they did back then? Could work today?" Oh yeah, certainly, absolutely. I just think it's not the priority. It's not what people do anymore. Trying to find this series that they had. Can't for the life of me remember how I found it. Yeah, I'm not seeing it anymore though. They might have stopped doing it because I'm not seeing it at all. But yeah, they had these really interesting kind of like distress swords that were intended to look like they were old. All right, let's see. No more questions yet. Wow. All right. Wish I could get this chat working. That's really frustrating. I'll have to try to work with this a bit more. By work today, I mean as a business. As a business model, it is happening, but I don't think that there's enough people with big enough pocketbooks to create those super ornate swords anymore. And when there are, they then hire someone like Andre Anderson, who does amazing work all by himself, right? So the the desire is out there, the demand is not very high, and so it will be expensive, no surprise, and it'll be a lot more rare because you'll run into more for sword people who spend money on this type of thing. You tend to end up with more people like myself who want the variety, not the single piece. As far as that's concerned, right? Like I'm willing to buy 10 cheaper swords than buy one really good one because I already have at least one really good one, so I don't need one more really good one, as it were. I like the variety, and mostly it's because I like talking about them. I like using them to be able to point to and speak about more so than use. Right? I mean, you look at all the weapons behind me. There's no way I'm using all of these things. But certainly, I like to talk about them, and I like to say, this style of hilt or this type of blade with this taper or this cross section, and be able to point to a live example of that. It's part of why I buy the swords that I do, and the ones I choose is to fill little niches of design or history that I don't have represented yet. So people who want that really good one, if they're willing to spend the money on it, they can find people who do amazing artistic work with it. But it's few and far between. What is the one thing I feel is consistently missed by most manufacturers of swords today? That's a really good question. You might have stumped me on that one. I think I don't. So it's not that it's consistently missed, but I think that there is a lack of surprisingly today. I think most manufacturers, most makers, still don't think of making a sword for the purposes of use. Even when they are looking to make it either cheaper or make it functional, there's just elements that might be missing. And I think that what I would say is it's the thing that's missed is innovation, trying to make it a little bit better. And it's not a bad thing, because I think most people are trying to replicate what was made. So it's not that I want to I don't want makers to become too modern with the swords. Like Albion is an example of this, is a really odd balance of that. I think that's why they're so good, is because they don't mind using very modern methods to make their weapons. They try to do it to a historical model, but they aren't afraid to use more modern techniques like epoxies, right? One person on here, avant-garde student, said that it's historical accuracy is one thing. I would say that's very true, and I would say most of the lack of accuracy for lawmakers is comes down to the cost of how you make it historically accurate. Because there's a lot that goes into that. The biggest one I would say you see with windlass all the time is they make sword blanks that have central ridges, and then if they're going to make a sword that's supposed to have a fuller, they just add a fuller to the sword that has a central ridge, and that misses the entire intent of how that blade would normally have been made. So now you have an arming sword that has a fuller down the length of it, but the tip has a ridge. Why does the tip have a ridge? It shouldn't have a ridge. It should be spatulated, right? Again, Albion, you can get that type of thing right more. But I think it varies from maker to maker as well, because I think some makers are a lot better than others at making historically accurate designs, if not implementations. And other makers try, but they aren't as good at it, or maybe it's not they're not as good at it, but their price point they're trying to meet doesn't support them going to the extreme they need to go to be completely accurate. Salato 2 says, I want to buy a relatively cheap Viking era sword. Any suggestions? Yeah, so windlass always can be a fairly decent choice for entry level. I think, hang on, let me go double check. I think Wolflund has some that are not stage combat these days. Let me see. I don't remember. They tend to be a little bit less expensive. No, this one is showing up as stage combat. But Museum Replicas surprisingly does not massively accurate, but they actually do halfway decent kind of Viking era style swords. You just have to be ready to not have massive historical accuracy when you're going to those lower price points, generally speaking. If you're willing to go to higher price points, you can get much better things, just in general. Matt said, have you ever had a sword that you initially did not like, but grew to love or at least appreciate? If so, what was it? Yes. See if I can find it. I've actually had the opposite happen as well, where I've had a sword that I used to like and then over time liked it less and less and less. Can't find it. Oh, because it's there. So this little arming sword here, I picked up at a museum replica's like warehouse sale or something. It was like $100, and I was like, yeah, whatever. It's okay. I was pretty well convinced that the mismatch between the cross and the pommel in terms of coloration was unintentional. I actually asked Windlass about it, and they said they didn't even know what type of sword it was. It wasn't until I got a hold of someone a little bit further deeper in to Windlass, they were actually able to get back to me and tell me that what the sword was, and I actually appreciate it a good bit more now that I know that like the design, the intent was actually accurate, and they were basing it on a historical model. It's actually also just in general a really, really good arming sword, like surprisingly good. It's not too heavy. It feels pretty darn good in the hand. The only real problem I have with it is the wire wrapping because it kind of feels slippery for the most part. And you can tell it's got a fairly wide grip or fairly long grip, a little bit longer it needs to be. But I also only spent $100 on it. So my appreciation of this sword has something to do with the amount of money I spent on it. All right. Sir Roland said, "What are your thoughts on the Masujowski Bible, also known as the Morgan Bible? Are those paintings with mounted knights cutting through helmets realistic? Make it possible to cut through quality steel with good sword?" You have to have a lot of grain of salt with medieval art just in general. Probably not, but there is some evidence to suggest that armor that might have been made out of not steel but rather iron was much more susceptible to damage. Whether or not by sword or not, I don't really know. I think that illuminated manuscript, that Bible, is much more it's much more a mix of fantasy and reality. It's not one or the other. And I think that's hard to separate the two, but I really doubt that people were cleaving helmets in two with large falchion-style swords. Let's see. And there's a second part to it that said maybe it is possible to cut through poor quality steel with good sword. Like I said, more likely cutting through poor quality iron or helmet that's not the best. What is exactly your obsession with owning so many types of swords? I know you've kind of answered this before, but with the amount of swords you own, I'm sure you could own quite a few of better, mid to high quality. I'll be honest, I'm pretty sure I own quite a few of that mid to high quality, and you kind of have to define what that looks like. My obsession with it, because when I retire, I want to open up a sword museum that talks about swords, not necessarily for the purposes of displaying artifacts, which I wish I could do. I wish I had the type of money, but more about their use and how they were made. Because what else am I going to do when I retire? But really, it's I don't know. I have that bit of a collector gene in me, I guess. I really like to collect things. I collect swords. My father collects guitars. He plays guitars. He plays them very well, and he has way too many of them. I play guitar too, but I use swords. I use them not so well, but I have a lot of them because I enjoy them. And I think that the variety is the spice of life, and I like that variety. Now, I do buy high-end swords. I have quite a few of them on my wall. I don't tend to go much higher price range than what Albion charges. And if I were, then I would probably go and get a smith to custom make me something a little bit more unique. So, am I ever planning on or ever purchasing some antiques? Yes. I actually have an entire blank spot on my armory wall where I eventually plan to put, uh, you know, sabers and cutlasses. You know, the more modern swords. When it comes to antiques, those are the ones that are actually affordable. Antiques that are antiques that are medieval are in museums. Yeah, they don't. I don't even think they should ever belong in personal collections. Really, I think they need to be there for everyone to be able to appreciate. I do have. I'm going to grab my camera here. Swap this over to the other view. We will come right over here. I should have the audio working off this camera, but this is actually an antique. This is a small sword blade from the Revolutionary War era in the U.S. See if I can't get a slightly better view of it, or just show it that way. This was dug up in the Hudson River Valley area of France. Not France, my goodness, of New York. But it is a French blade. I based that on some research that I did. I don't think you can see it, but on this part of the blade, it might be on the other side of it actually, is what looks like a stamping on the blade that has a Roman numeral number, and it's XVIII. After some research, I found out that in both Germany and in France, it was common to use XVIII instead of sorry, it's yeah, in order to say like 19 instead of IX in Roman numerals. Sorry, it's four I's, I think. But anyway, so it was very common, and so I found out that essentially this was more than likely a French blade. And like I talked about with small swords, you have a French blade, and then it would get shipped to like the United States, and some silversmith would put it all together. The tang on it, the very tip of the tang, you can actually feel where it's mushroomed, so you know that it was actually peened down at some point. Like that's still evident on it, but somehow all the hilt assembly is missing. So after doing the research, I found that Del Tin made a sword that was roughly replicative of it. You know, small swords from that time period, as well as in the United States, tended to actually be more triangular in proportion to the kind of, they call it the cochlear blade type or something like that. So having a very flat, almost oval shaped blade was actually pretty rare, and so did some search and some research. Now, all that said, I could be completely wrong about all that, but I believe that I am fairly accurate in my assessment of the source of the blade, and yeah, it was gifted to me by my uncle, who had it because a friend gave it to him, and the friend who gave it to him is the one who dug it up when he was farming land in the Hudson Valley River in New York. So, and in this display case as well, I have, might be worth pointing out just because it's interesting, or more interesting. I have a little Viking coin here, or not Viking, sorry, Templar coin. See, I say things that I don't mean. A little Templar coin. And as far as I know, it is an original. Those things are actually, to some extent, on a historical scale, it's like a dime a dozen. And on the other side, with this little piece of paper that just fell over, is actually a ring that, in theory, is actually somewhere from the very late Middle Ages or early Renaissance that was found. It has a little story behind it. But yeah, so this is the display case I use for my actual artifacts, as it were. I actually have some other things like musket balls and whatnot, but not on display. And yeah, really, I just wanted to have a nice display for, and a good way to keep my my nice little small sword blade there. So it's important to me to have a good thing. I'm gonna come back. I'll just swing this back around. And we will look at what other questions people might have. Let's see here. No new questions. All right. Well, so before I go, I figured I'd give a little bit more time for people to ask questions. And on the same token, if anyone has any specific thing they might be interested to see in the armory, let me know, because that's why I set it up down here, so people had the opportunity to say, oh, what is that thing? Can you talk about that a bit, if there's any interest in that. I'll try to get a better view from the camera so you can actually see the armory in general. Someone said maybe Matt Easton could get me a good deal on Saber. Yeah. I would be going through a lot of the more typical antique dealers. Matt Easton maybe being one of them. Is there any one particular type of sword I prefer over others? I'm a pretty big fan of a good greatsword. Maybe that's more aesthetically driven than functionally driven, because functionally I think I prefer a long sword or a good arming sword. But there's just something about great swords. I really like the way they look. I think their size and proportion just feels right. And so when I say that, I mean something more like this claymore up on the wall behind me. Those are certainly, I think, some of my more favored types of weapons. From a pure usability standpoint, though, I think it's going to be, it's probably going to be the long sword, just because I use long swords more. It's kind of a boring answer, honestly. For people who do HEMA, we all eventually just say long swords are boring because we've been doing it so long. They're not boring, though. They're still a lot of fun. The halberd behind the spear. The halberd behind the spear. I'm not sure what spear. I don't have a spear over here. This one. This is a halberd from Assassin's Creed, I think. I got it on the cheap. Favorite fighting school or system? So when it comes to historical European martial arts, I've always been German, just in general, and most of that has been under that kind of Lichtenauer tradition, which means, Ringek and all that. I tend to kind of jump back and forth between like because Meyer is a really good, more comprehensive system in general. And Italian is great. I love the Italian sword work. The problem is it doesn't work for my brain. The terminology doesn't work for my brain. So I tend to be more down that kind of Germanic sword line. It also works for me because I'm actually a really tall person compared to a lot of people. So my body makeup, my body size works better for the German system, because it's all fighting high. It's having a sword high up above you. It doesn't rely as much on thrust. It can rely a bit more on, to some extent, raw power. I always kind of say, if you were to make a comparison, German sword fighting feels like Taekwondo versus like like a karate that relies more on like speed and accuracy, where Taekwondo is just like punch as hard as you can for a moment, right? In terms of just general philosophy, and I think that kind of remains true. It makes sense for the people that would have done that type of fighting. Let's see. Dan Cord says, Kingston Arms is making swords that used to be made by Hanwei, the side swords and Fader. Any opinion on those? No. Kingston Arms is essentially, they are their own maker, but they all kind of channel up through that Cass Iberia brand in general. I know that Kingston Arms in general has made better weapons, in my opinion. Like, I think they take a little bit more time on their quality. They had a few missteps early on. If you go look at my my very first review, I think it was of the Cressy war sword, or the Cressy arming sword that they did. I actually had more complaints about it, but they also did this one, which they sent me for review, and then I purchased because I liked it so much. But it's this kind of Norman sword, and I think they've done an incredible job with this one. So Kingston Arms is, in my opinion, as far as brands go, it's an up and coming brand, and they're filling a very necessary niche part of the market, which is that kind of mid tier weapons swords that are well made, well thought out, and work pretty darn well. So, what has my experience with Albion shipping times been like? Ever since they got really popular, they don't ship anytime soon. I waited 18 months to get the Kern, so I still have yet to do a review of that one. I really need to get around to it. But when I bought that sword, I bought it directly from them, gave them the specifications I wanted in terms of grip color and all that. And yeah, 18 months. They have a huge backlog, so what are you going to do? All right, guys, this has been a 2.5-hour stream. I think it might be time to call it quits. I definitely enjoyed doing it. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to hang out. Certainly, I think I'm going to try to get some of the things fixed that I couldn't get working. I really wanted to have that chat feature working, because once this hits the general, the kind of just general channel that people are going to watch later, you know, it may or may not be useful in terms of what's going on in chat. I always feel like Twitch is slightly better for that, but Twitch isn't really good for the purposes of doing a live stream for just like what I'm doing here. I'm not gaming, right? I mean, I'm happy to, but it's not really the right channel for it. So, but I definitely enjoy doing this. I think I'm going to try to do more live streams and try to get more people together for conversations, because it's kind of one-sided when I'm just kind of sitting here talking. It's kind of strange. And even though I got you guys in chat to talk to, it's, you know, there's always that bit of a delay and not direct feedback. So I think there's something to be said for having some more interesting conversations. Getting to go through the museums, you know, I actually had quite a few tabs open. There's other museums we didn't get to, but I wanted to cover the ones that I did in the more recent travel. So it's good stuff. I've really enjoyed it. We had I think the peak was well over 30 people. Currently 34 watching, and it got above 40 for a bit there. So in my estimation, having 40 people watching this live stream is incredibly amazing. To have that many people who take time, and some of you who have been here since the beginning of me doing the stream. Yeah, it's really cool. So I appreciate it, guys, and tell you what, I'll try to do more of these in the future. Keep an eye on my channel discussion on the kind of comment section under the community part of my channel, because I will post live stream times, and if I'm doing them, I'll post it there. But otherwise, cheers, guys. Really do appreciate it, and I hope you have a good weekend and a good week coming up. And expect some actual videos to come from me here in the next couple days. Cheers.